Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive into the rigorous, honestly kind of hidden, discipline of aviation preparation. We're going to use an actual trainee's cross-country checklist as our guide today. If you've ever looked up at a plane and wondered exactly what it takes to get it safely from point A to point B, well, you are in for a fascinating journey. We're going to break down the exact step-by-step manual that aviators use to conquer the skies and really see how modern aviation relies on intense, uncompromising redundancy to completely minimize human error.
Most people think flying just starts at the aircraft. You know the drill. You grab the keys, do a quick walk around, and take off, right? Well, actually, the immense preparation required begins way earlier than that. It literally starts with the pilot's own biology, their strict schedule, and yes, even their hygiene.
So, here is our flight plan for this explainer. We'll quickly cover the human element, weather and route planning, checking the aircraft, emergency preparation, and finally, the flight and beyond.
Let's dive right into Section 1, Pre-Flight, the human element. Believe it or not, the very first items on a trainee's checklist focus entirely on the human being. Long before they even touch any controls, a trainee pilot has to meticulously log their time. They're strictly monitoring a 12-hour flight duty window, logging their exact gate in and gate out entries. And beyond just time management, there's a biological check. A mandatory breath analyzer test absolutely must be passed, with exact timings noted, followed by signing the attendance register and briefing signatures. It's this rigorous chain of accountability before they even see the tarmac.
And this is honestly one of my favorite parts. It brilliantly illustrates the surprising, highly relatable details of the job. Pilots are actually required to maintain personal hygiene and body odor. They're explicitly instructed to use perfume and mouth freshener before every single flight. When you think about it, a cockpit is a really small, confined space shared with an instructor or co-pilot for hours on end. So maintaining a pleasant environment isn't just polite, it's a documented procedural requirement. Oh, and right alongside that personal hygiene check, making sure an air sickness bag is on board. Absolutely crucial.
Next up, the pilot has to physically carry what is basically an alphabet soup of valid credentials just to prove they are legally and medically cleared to fly. We aren't just talking about a simple driver's license here. They have to carry their valid flight crew licenses, their student pilot license, or SPL, their FRTOL, or FRTOL-R for radio telephony, and their current medical certificate. If they are missing just one of these, the flight is completely grounded.
Moving right along to Section 2, Weather and Route Planning.
So, pilots obviously can't just stick their head out the window to check the weather. They have to translate highly technical meteorological codes to ensure they know exactly what the sky holds. This involves a really deep knowledge of meteorological briefings, decoding MEDARs, which are routine aviation weather reports, and TAFs, which are terminal aerodrome forecasts. They take these data points, combine them with satellite and radar images, and even traditional ground-level windsock interpretations to build this complete 3D mental model of the atmosphere.
When you consider the massive list of physical tools required on board, the cognitive load is just staggering. To calculate checkpoints and headings, a pilot relies on a digital watch set to UTC time, a physical mud map with checkpoints, operational navigation charts, and Jeppesen en route charts. Plus, they use a Douglas and nautical mile scale to measure distances, alongside a navigation log sheet loaded with wind-corrected headings. And to process all this data on the fly, a good old-fashioned calculator and a notepad for writing down clearances. Like I said earlier, redundancy is key.
Now, this next point is absolutely crucial. Despite all the advanced technology in modern aviation, backup data for alternate landing spots must be manually handwritten and carried on board. If the primary destination is compromised for any reason, the pilot needs the runway orientation, the elevation, and all communication and navigation frequencies for their alternate aerodrome written down in ink. This guarantees that even if there is a total electrical failure, the pilot has the exact data they need to land that plane safely. No exceptions.
Amidst all the complex math, the endless charts, and the weather decoding, there's another great humanizing requirement on the checklist: packing refreshments. But it's highly specific. The manual requires sweets specifically for controlling blood sugar levels during the flight, alongside water for hydration. Decision fatigue and blood sugar crashes are very real physiological threats when you're doing complex mental math at high altitudes, so a quick sugar boost is literally a safety protocol.
All right, let's hit Section 3, checking the aircraft.
Before they step inside, the journey logbook is a pilot's best friend. It requires a really strict chain of custody, demonstrating exactly how responsibility transfers.
First, the pilot verifies the aircraft has been officially released by the aircraft maintenance engineer. Then, they sign a pilot acceptance certificate. But wait, they aren't done yet. They have to verify how many flight hours remain before the next scheduled maintenance is due, and they meticulously check and record the fuel and oil uplift records. Before the engine even turns over, the pilot has to balance a mountain of physical paperwork with digital requirements. They need the load and trim sheets signed by the pilot in command, calculating exact weight and balance. They need both an online and physical copy of their flight plan. Then they secure a barrage of security and airspace clearances, like the Air Defense Clearance, or ADC, and Flight Information Center Clearance, or FIC, along with their route clearance and a specific squawk code. And tech-wise, the GPS must be fully set on the ground before taxiing out. No programming while you're rolling.
Now for what is definitely the most intense part, Section 4, Preparing for Emergencies. You know, aviation is incredibly safe, precisely because of this rigorous preparation. Before taking off, a pilot must have the immediate actions for every nightmare scenario entirely memorized without needing to check a manual. I mean, the departure briefing covers normal and emergency checklists, sure, but rote memorization is required for a forced landing, electrical fire, engine fire, cabin and wing fire, and engine failure immediately after takeoff or during the flight. When seconds count, the pilot has to act purely on practiced instinct and perfectly memorized protocol.
Aside from all that memorization, they also have to physically carry contingency protocols, like the lost procedure or the radio communications failure procedure. This just goes to show that in aviation, you absolutely must always have a backup plan. If your radios die or your GPS totally fails and you lose your bearings, you don't panic. You simply pull out the physical checklist and execute the contingency plan.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the flight and beyond. During the flight itself, a trainee is super busy with map-to-ground and ground-to-map reading. But how the flight is officially authorized changes entirely based on who is actually flying. Notice how the liability and paperwork shift dynamically in the flight authorization register. If it's a dual sortie, meaning an instructor is sitting right there, the student only signs the after-flight column. But if it's a solo sortie, the student is stepping up to the plate. They have to sign both the before and after flight columns right alongside the signature of the pilot in command.
And hey, the mission isn't over just because the rubber met the runway. There's a rigid sequence of bureaucratic logging to ensure the flight is officially and safely closed. In the journey logbook, the pilot has to provide their final signature and fill out the performance log. They must make crucial phone calls to respective air traffic centers to pass along their landing estimates and final landing info. Lastly, they have to cross-check and approve the digital EGCA aviation portal entries. Only then, after all that, is the job truly done.
So, what does this all mean for us? We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. After seeing the sheer volume of mental preparation, human discipline, meteorological decoding, and massive paperwork required for just one trainee's cross-country flight, how will your appreciation change? The next time you walk onto a commercial flight and pass that cockpit door, I want you to remember the handwritten aerodrome coordinates, the fully memorized engine failure protocols, and yes, even the required mouth freshener that keep the skies safe. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity flying high.